Welcome to All Things Social Security. My name is Stephanie Joy of Joy Disability. I am a Social Security disability attorney, and I would like to invite you to watch our daily video tips on the Social Security disability and SSI claims process each day at the new time of noon Eastern Standard Time here on YouTube on this channel. And on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have our live Q&A live stream. So you are welcome to join that as well. Ask your questions, get there on time, and you'll be one of the first answered. Thanks so much and have a great day. Enjoy the video. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Stephanie Joy with All Things Social Security and Joy Disability. Okay, today we are talking about obesity. We all know when we put on a bit of extra weight, activities become harder, a lot of them. A lot of the movements, postures, bending, twisting, speed, joints start to hurt, etc., etc. It used to be, and I don't believe I was even practicing when this was a fact. However, obesity used to be, as I understand it, a listing level impairment. It was most likely morbid obesity, but nowadays half the population is morbidly obese, and they work. So clearly it's not always disabling. But it came up the other day and I wanted to bring it up because despite the fact that it's not a listing, it's a really important factor, probably well underplayed by the SSA and the adjudicators and representatives and claimants. I think potentially claimants don't want to say they have the impairment of obesity as one of their impairments that limit them. It might be uncomfortable. I know how we all feel about our weight, right? So when it gets super, super high, it might be even more of a sensitive subject. But I think it's really important to bring out. Now, I will say if you haven't brought it out in your claim, and I would still advise that people do, the numbers are generally always there in your doctor's records because they do that weight and height thing. And a lot of times it even says BMI. So even if you don't put it in, it is going to be there. But the fact that you don't complain about it and you don't mention how you're extra weight, you're always trying to lose, but it is so hard to twist and turn, and the joints hurt, and you're told by your doctors that losing weight would alleviate some of that pain and limitation and stiffness and everything else. That might be a wise thing to do. But what I wanted to specifically go into is, despite the fact that the listing was obliterated years and years ago, and I understand that, I suppose, to an extent, they did different policy interpretation rulings over the years. And this most recent one I'm looking at is from 2019, and it was supposed to kind of sum up all the things that they had been changing over the years or re-explaining and put it all into one. So this is SSR, that's Social Security ruling 19-2P. So that's the year 2019 is where they get that number from, and 2P. Title 2 and 16, that's Social Security Disability and SSI, evaluating cases involving obesity. They do note that they rescind, as per this 2019 narrative, and replace Social Security ruling 02, which would be 2002-1P, which had the same name, I believe. And they just say that they're providing this guidance on how the SSA establishes that a person has a medically determinable impairment, MDI, guys, medically determinable impairment, which is one of the necessaries on the sequential evaluation process, the MDI of obesity, because it is an impairment. It just is not a listing, okay, in and of itself. And how we evaluate, they say, obesity and disability claims under SSD Title II and SSI Title 16 of the Social Security Act. So they go on to say, as a general intro, that the obesity, when it's established by objective medical evidence, that would be signs, laboratory findings, or both, from an acceptable medical source, that's AMS, acceptable medical source, it is an MDI. I will say again that the objective medical evidence, signs, I would say diagnostic tests, they say laboratory findings, or both. So I suppose it would be signs when they step you on the scale and they see that you weigh 450 pounds and you're 5'2". Here we go. All right, so the evidence is always going to be easily available for this impairment. Never ends the day about whether you're going to be found disabled, but all these crumbs add up. So I just don't want you to forget about them and not use them to your advantage. It can tip you over the edge, if you will. I mean, we have had severe obesity cases with young people. And I think the one I'm thinking of off the top of my head, when it's enough for a young person. All the kind of impairments stemmed from it. It was like a 550-pound 30-year-old, nicest guy in the world. And we had to go all the way to ALJ hearing because it's not something that's just going to be accepted as such. So it's that discretionary thing that we get from an ALJ that we don't get from our adjudicators at initial and recon at the DDS. And mind you, I don't think that's their fault. I think they have strict rules they have to fly by, and they're not allowed the same discretion that a judge is allowed. As we say, they're more like checking off boxes. Did you meet it? If not, move along. Okay. So they go on to say answers to specific questions. For instance, how does the medical community diagnose obesity? And they talk about it being a complex disorder characterized by an excessive amount of body fat. It is usually the result of many factors, including environment, family history, genetics, metabolism, and behavior. I like the fact that behavior is last and comes after a significant other list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 others, because the stigma of obesity has always been a real put down to the person suffering from it, as if it is their fault. And I'm not saying we don't control our behaviors because we are the only person that can. However, we all know we can have 2 people eating the same amount and one's going to be 400 pounds and one's going to be $120. We've seen it. We all have that relative, right? So I like the fact that they very just objectively note that that's just one factor. And we all know that behavior is also affected by our environment, our upbringing, all sorts of things. Okay, I'm not going to go into the diagnostic test because it's stepping on the scale. When they talk about how the practitioners diagnose obesity, we all know how that's done. It's pretty much elementary. But then they go on to say which other impairments are often associated with obesity. So take note of this too. It says obesity is often associated with musculoskeletal, respiratory, cardiovascular, and endocrine disorders. Obesity also increases the risk of developing impairments, including type 2 diabetes, diseases of the heart and blood vessels, for example, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis, heart attacks, and stroke. Respiratory impairments, for example, sleep apnea, asthma, and obesity. I think it's called obesity hypoventilation syndrome. Osteoarthritis is another one caused by obesity. Mental impairments, for example, depression, for sure. I think also anxiety. Let's throw that in there. Cancers of the esophagus, pancreas, colon, rectum, kidney, endometrium, ovaries, gallbladder, breast, or liver. So our risk of cancer goes way up when we are obese too, as I understand it. And they seem to allude to here. They go on to say that the fact that obesity increases the risk for developing other impairments does not mean that people with obesity necessarily have any of these impairments, and they will not presume them. Those have to be individually diagnosed, guys, by an acceptable medical source, AMS, which would be an MD or a DO. And now they are allowing, thankfully, certain like advanced practitioner registered nurses, physician's assistants, things of that nature. Okay, so the next one, number 3, how does the SSA establish obesity as an MDI, medically determinable impairment? They go on to say that they establish it by considering objective medical evidence, which is those signs and tests and stuff, stepping on the scale. And they will not use a diagnosis or a statement of symptoms to establish the existence of an MDI. So if someone just claims it to be obesity as a diagnosis, but then doesn't have those objective medical evidence like the signs, the stepping on the scale, lab findings, etc., they will not use a mere statement that one is obese without seeing those numbers. And again, those numbers typically are there. They're just, your doctor's office weighs you. That's how it goes. Or I don't know, when it gets to be a really high weight, maybe some doctor's office don't have scales that accommodate. That might be old school. Don't know if that's still a problem today. They discussed that it would be the measured height and the weight. That would be the signs and laboratory findings. Measured height, measured weight, measured waist size, and BMI measurements over time. I'm going to skip down about when they go into BMI. They do say that although there's often a correlation between BMI and excess body fat, this is not always the case. Someone who has a BMI of 30 above may not have an MDI of obesity. When deciding whether a person has an MDI of obesity, they will consider the person's weight over time. We consider the person to have an MDI of obesity as long as his or her weight, measured waist size, or BMI shows a consistent pattern of obesity. And when is obesity, this is number 4, a severe impairment? Because remember, in the sequential evaluation process, they have to find an MDI, medically determinable impairment, and then they have to find that it is severe to move forward in the process. They will consider your impairment in the whole gist of reviewing everything, if you have another severe impairment, they have to look at the non-severes also, but this is when they determine it's severe. We evaluate the severity, they say, of obesity by considering all evidence from all sources. We consider all symptoms such as fatigue or pain that could limit functioning. We consider any functional limitations in the person's ability to do basic work activities resulting from obesity and from any other physical or mental impairments. If the person's obesity alone or in combination with another impairment or impairments significantly limits his or her physical or mental ability to do basic activities, we find that the impairment is severe. We find, however, that the impairment is not severe if it does not significantly limit the person's physical or mental ability to do basic work activities. So that definition is the way it is for all impairments. So that's really nothing new. You just kind of have to think of it in the terms of what the functional limitations are stemming from the obesity itself, okay? It could be concentration based on the depression, perhaps, but the depression will also be another impairment, right? Okay, they do go on to say also that no specific weight or BMI establishes obesity as severe or not severe as an impairment. Similarly, a medical source's descriptive terms for levels of obesity, such as severe, extreme, or morbid, do not establish whether obesity is a severe impairment for disability program purposes. They do an individualized assessment of the effect of obesity on a person's functioning when deciding whether the impairment is severe. And that is also true of many other things. So one thing that it just brings to my mind is when you are, and this is hard because nobody really likes to talk about the obesity in their own. I mean, even some of us when we gain 10, 20, we're like, don't even want to mention it, we're just hoping it's going to go away. Or we'll like drop it before anyone notices. But, it's just something that needs to be discussed with the doctor because let's say you are significantly heavy, and I'm talking well above just overweight. If you find you're clumsier and you're falling, and you might not have a severe sciatic problem or radiculopathy from a bad back. You might not have that. That might not be in your records, but you are nonetheless tripping and falling. And that's a great risk, huge risk of hurting yourself in a multitude of ways. That's something you want to bring up to your doctor, even if you're not getting treated for a bad back because you don't actually have a bad back. Like maybe you've had it worked up due to little aches and there's nothing objectively shown in MRIs. But if you are nonetheless having symptoms that affect ambulation, walking, sitting, can't get up from a seated position, if you get on the floor, you can't get up without maybe grabbing the couch or crawling over to the couch or whatever. These are things you might want to talk about with your doctor because then it will be really expressed in the records. Because remember, what we say does not hold water in and of itself if the evidence of it is not kind of in the records to some degree. Our subjective statements, it's not that they think we're lying. They're obligated to find evidence of that in the record because if it was happening, the presumption is that you're going to be talking to your doctor about it because it's an unsafe thing for you. And that might be when a doctor prescribes a cane for better balance. It might be a walker. Obviously, it's going to say drop weight, but they can say that to us until we're blue in the face. It's easier said than done, and they know that, and the SSA recognizes that. In fact, failure to lose weight when recommended is not considered, thank God, non-compliance with medical advice, which could be a grounds for denying a claim in other areas, but not for weight loss. So that's a good thing. Okay, so they do talk about how they evaluate obesity under the listings, even though it's not a listing. They specifically say obesity is not a listed impairment. However, the functional limitations caused by the MDI, medically determinable impairment of obesity alone or in combination with other impairments, always remember that they're going to look at the whole combo as well as each one individually, may medically equal a listing. So remember, you might not meet a listing, but you could equal a listing, even though you're not under that. So really, really, really important. For example, obesity may increase the severity of a coexisting or related impairment to the extent that the combination of impairments medically equal a listing. The SSA is not going to make general assumptions about the severity or the functional effects of obesity combined with other impairments. Obesity in combination with other impairments may or may not increase the severity or functional limitations of other impairments. We evaluate each case, they're saying, based on the information in the case record. Now, case record does include what you describe in your function report. It would include what you testify to. However, again, you need to have that fact of the obesity, and I strongly urge that you would have the symptoms you are suffering, the activities of daily living that are hard for you, unable to be done by you, unsafe for you, expressly discussed with your doctor, because that gives a better chance of it than getting into your medical record. And it's not just something that's tutored by you in your function report or testimony at hearing. Okay, moving on. And we're getting, I think, towards the end. I'm not sure. Number 6, they answer the question of how does the SSA consider obesity in assessing the person's RFC? You know, we talk about RFC all the time, residual functional capacity. It is a determination that the SSA has to make on every case where a person does not meet or equal a listing. They're going to say that they must consider the limiting effects of obesity when assessing the person's RFC. Thank goodness. This is why you want it always to be included. RFC is the most, so don't ignore it. Again, guys, put it in your claim. RFC is the most an adult can do despite his or her limitations. As with any other impairment, we will explain, they say, how we reach our conclusion on whether obesity causes any limitations. I cannot imagine a single case of significant obesity that does not cause some sort of limitation. Now, some sort of limitation isn't going to get you disability, but it will nick away certain jobs that require that particular thing to be able to be done, whether it's frequently during the day, constantly during the day, or occasionally during the day. But if that person can't do it because of their obesity, that would carve out those jobs. And as you know, we need to carve out 12,000 occupations, give or take. Keep doing it. Keep doing it. It sounds like a nitpicky thing, and it is kind of nitpicky. As I always say, we have to thread the needle, right? So we want to start getting evidence of other jobs that would be knocked out, and we just start carving away through all those impairments. And obesity is an important one. Okay. They say that a person may have limitations in any of the exertional functions, which are, and I'm going to name them now, sitting, standing, walking, lifting, carrying, pushing, and pulling. A person may have limitations in the non-exertional functions of climbing, balancing, stooping, kneeling, crouching, and crawling. I know crouching can be tough. Obesity increases stress on weight-bearing joints and may contribute to limitation of the range of motion of the skeletal spine and extremities. Obesity may also affect a person's ability to manipulate objects. If there is adipose, fatty tissue, in the hands and fingers, or the ability to tolerate extreme heat, humidity, or hazards. I want to go back and just highlight the fact of the adipose fatty tissue that can be in hands and fingers. I know people who have very, shall we say, fat hands. There's a lot of flesh around each finger. Each finger cannot do all the things that it could do if it didn't have those. That will greatly affect somebody's ability to do fine manipulation. It could be, there's jobs. I mean, if you saw some of the jobs, how about a lens fitter? Fitting a little tiny lens into a little tiny envelope over and over and over again. And it's an unskilled job. So anyone who's relegated to unskilled or above can be stuck with this. It could be a lens fitter, not disabled. And that's true for a lot of people. They could be. But an obese person, if their hands are also, I'll call it obese, for lack of a better word, could not get those jobs. So just always be aware. This is how I say, we thread that needle. We're like poking away at ones that we know they're going to bring up. Let's see. The SSA assesses the RFC to show the effect obesity has upon the person's ability to perform routine movement and necessary physical activity within the work environment. People with an MDI of obesity may have limitations in the ability to sustain a function over time, right? Something you might be able to do a couple hours a day, you can't do for 8. In cases involving obesity, fatigue may affect the person's physical and mental ability to sustain work activity. I have a video or two on fatigue, guys. If you have the obesity thing, or your loved one does, and the fatigue thing comes into play, their stamina is very short-lived, because that's a lot of energy that the body is doing just to do the basic movements to get around. You might want to look at that. This may be particularly true in cases involving obesity and sleep apnea. So all things to think about. They go on to say that the combined effects of obesity with another impairment may be greater than the effects of each of the impairments considered separately. This is why they have to consider them all together as well. I mean, if you have bad knees combined with obesity, that is likely way more limiting than bad knees on a slender person, right? So the obese person might have a better chance of prevailing in their case than a slender person with bad knees. Okay. For example, they say someone who has obesity and arthritis, I think I have video on arthritis, affecting a weight-bearing joint. All right, so what are we talking about? Hips, knees, feet, may have more pain and functional limitations than a person would have due to the arthritis alone. We consider all work-related physical and mental limitations, they say, whether due to a person's obesity, other impairments, or a combination of impairments. So there you have it. Super, super important. I think we're underplaying it. And I think we should be using it more in our cases for my fellow reps, but also pro se claimants. Don't be shy. Don't let things we don't discuss like that. Don't prevent that from going into your claim. It's going nowhere but your claim. Nobody else is going to see it. Your neighbor's not going to see it. Your coworker's not going to see it if you have one. So, all right, obesity. It is really, really important, and I think we're not using it enough. I tend to write it down. My clients don't write it down when I ask for the list. So when I see that they are, because the SSA initial materials also ask for their height and weight. And when I see it and I know they're obese, I put it in there myself for them because that's my job. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a great day.